Have you ever wondered whether the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment, and acted from that place?
Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your hosts Brian Berneman and Kayla Greenville, who believe that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world.
We are here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers.
From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world. Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host. For this episode, I have the pleasure to be joined all the way from Victoria, Australia, just across the ocean here, by Stephen Milverton. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and for sharing this episode. For those that are listening, who is Stephen?
Well, thanks, Brian, and thanks for having me as a guest on your podcast. First of all, I'm really grateful for anyone that's willing to sit down and do podcasts and have this chat. So, who's Stephen? At the moment, I'm a very happy, heart-driven individual. That's where my journey has got me to. It probably wasn't the journey that I've been on for a lot of years, and we can definitely be chatting about that. But certainly, as of the moment, I'm just very heart-driven. I'm just full of love, joy. I enjoy every morning when I wake up. It's like I got to breathe. I get to have another day here, to get to spend time with people. And every night when I go to sleep, it's the same thing. Just a lot of gratitude for what took place during the day. So I'm in a really beautiful place at the moment, and I think that's the best way to introduce me or describe who I am at this point in time.
Beautiful, thank you. Yeah, we were talking about all of the labels that we use for ourselves, and of course the labels are helpful for interactions and are helpful for certain agreements that we have in terms of our place and our role in different aspects. So I am going to invite you to share some of those labels with us, because the more that we allow ourselves to just be, the more that there is nothingness in a sense. And I know based on our conversation that what you do is really beautiful and really necessary as well in this time. So would you be able to share a little bit around that?
Oh, absolutely. So from that aspect, I'm from Australia. I'm definitely Australian. Born down in southwest Victoria in Australia, and I'm back down living down here near the coast. My day job is an IT program manager, so delivering large IT projects. That's what I do. I suppose that's what pays for the lifestyle that I've got. I enjoy that because I get to interact with people every day, and and I get to work on really large, challenging projects that I suppose for me stimulates my brain. Outside of that, I have an initiative called the Unearthed Men. The Unearthed Man is predominantly a podcast itself, similar to this, but it's actually just talking with men about the journeys that they've been on, the challenges they've had in life. So it's to create a shared open space for men to feel safe so they can share all their vulnerabilities. My podcast has a simple message that the right message will meet the right person at the right time. And so having a variation of men come on and talk to their journeys, then there might be another man go, oh my God, like he's talking to me. That's exactly the challenges I've been through. And I can see how they've come out of it. Maybe there's an option for me, which is, not the path that some men unfortunately go down to. And statistics will say 7 out of 9 suicides are men, which is really tragic. So that's part of my podcast initiative, is to show men that, there is a path out of whatever challenges that they're facing. And outside of that, I've got a business which is around career empowerment coaching. So I'm a career empowerment coach, and I take people through a bit of a journey who have got to somewhere in their careers and go, is this it? Like, is this really what life's about? The mortgage, the kids, living in the middle of suburbia, just is it meant to be this mundane, or is there a much more beautiful life? Am I meant to have this stress and anxiety in my life, or is there a path out? So I work with people in helping them see the light, if you like, and helping them move away from all the externalizations that take place. So, my piece at the moment, and part of whether it's the labeling or not, is my view at the moment is society is all about outsourcing. We outsource everything. We outsource our happiness. We outsource our shopping. We outsource, where I get my entertainment from, outsourced, whether that be through drugs or alcohol or, Netflix or social media. Everything, it just appears to be how quickly can I outsource something, because then that helps me chase my happiness. And the challenge with that is that when that's taken away from you, the alternate path at the other end of the pendulum is, sadness and lack of happiness, because all the things that I attach to are no longer there. So part of my journey as well, and working with others, is to see how can they actually achieve internal happiness, which is, as I said, where I started with myself. I've found that through, being heart driven and actually being of service to people and working with others. And that just gives me inner joy. And therefore I don't really need all the other external activities. Having said that, I've been down that path. I've been down the addiction path. I've been down those areas to try and actually, I suppose, numb myself and find ways out of sadness and out of anger and out of frustration. And so, this has been a good journey for me to land to where I am.
Beautiful. And I have a few follow-up questions about that, but would you mind sharing, Stephen, a little bit about that part of your journey? Like what was your life like, and where did the transformation started to happen, and how did that go, and how it's still going?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Definitely, Brian. So the background story is me is I grew up small country town, two brothers, one older, one younger. So, whether you call it middle child syndrome, whatever, again, label you want to put on it. My dad was a school teacher and my mum worked in a bank and then in a local Medicare office. So, they just all had standard jobs. Everyone from the outside looking into our life, we were the perfect little family unit, brought up Catholic, go to church every Sunday, going to Catholic schools, always, going to sporting events and everything else. So I had friends and I had other people around me, like, you just got these fantastic, beautiful parents and, what a great life you've actually got. The challenge is that, that's the equivalent of what we see on all the social media pictures these days, how easy it is for me to put out what my perfect life is. Behind those closed doors, there was nothing like that. From as young as I can remember, I was in competition with my two brothers, in the world of any attention's good attention. When you have an older brother who's bigger than you, then you got to get to attention some way. And then you have a younger brother that's always the youngest in the family sort of thing. So I was always in competition, always in fighting. I grew up in that thing. So whatever my brother did in sporting sense, I had to do better. If he could run 100 meters in 13 seconds, I'm going to run in 12 and a half seconds. If he could win a best and fairest at baseball in juniors, I'm going to win a best and fairest. Like everything that he did, I just had to continue to top him. And so that was just this constant competition. And so for me, what also happened out of that was because of the competing, there was this sense of ongoing, I suppose, frustration and anger. And so for me, the competition was more about seeking attention from my parents. Like, how do you get in a family where there's three boys, how do you get the attention? So mine ended up being, more about playing up and being the rebel and, and being the one that would, argue a lot with parents and push back with the parents. And so, pretty much from the age of 12 onwards, I never had an emotional relationship with my father. I did with my mother, but not with my dad. So there was always conflict constantly, with my dad and like, unlike others who might have had some really bad traumas in their life, like violence and, growing up with alcoholic parents and everything else. That wasn't in my family. Like my parents, as I said, had beautiful relationships, had really nice friends. But again, it was like, how do I actually get the attention in this family? The other thing is innately, I'm a very emotional person who sought just, I suppose, wanting to be consoled and wanting to actually be seen on an emotional level. My dad, his father fought in Gallipoli, which is, you're based in New Zealand, I'm based in Australia. So Anzac Day's, something we celebrate every year. And so that's very close to my heart. But my grandfather came back and he was unemotional. He was scarred from the war. So my dad, who was 9 years younger than his next sibling, basically grew up in the family with no emotion at all. My mum left at the age of 15 and she had alcoholic parents and abusive parents. So she had no emotion. So they had to survive for the soul. So, that's where we ended. That's where I landed. They didn't know, how to hug. They didn't know how to cuddle. They didn't know how to just give true love. It was a very practical upbringing and relationship. And I think that's where I struggled, because there was a lot of abandonment that took place through that areas. So again, how would I get past that? Well, then I would play up. At the age of 15, I found alcohol. So myself and a friend pitched a tent out the backyard of my parents' place, and we went in and, started to drink. And then that was it from that point of view. So from 15 till 32, I just drank very heavily. So alcohol was a big part of my life. And then from about 18, 19 onwards, I found pornography. So my two outlets were pornography and alcohol. Never got into drugs or gambling. I never actually got into, funny enough, from an addiction point of view, but certainly there was probably enough in those two spaces. That resulted in a lot of challenging relationships that I had, because I didn't have any emotion when I was going out with, trying to find a partner, that would have often end up in arguments and fights with, alcohol driven fights. I was also quite angry and frustrated, so even going through school, I was friendly with everybody, but I had a couple of close friends, but that was about it. But I would always blow up. There'd always be this venting and this frustration that would come out. And that kept playing over and over throughout my life. I got to met my now wife, my current wife. I've only ever had one wife, by the way. So I was engaged, and that broke off again. That was just a really tumultuous relationship. A lot of alcohol, a lot of fights and arguments. But yeah, I met my wife when I was 28. She was 18, 19. We didn't realize there's a 10-year gap. And then we had our daughter 18 months after we got together. And then basically about 5 years after that. So yeah, we got together about 97. And then 5 years after that, when my daughter was born, my son was born, I just made a decision that it was time to get off the alcohol. I'd had a major event that had taken place. I just drank all day. And my wife ended up meeting us, myself and some friends at the pub. She'd organised the kids to be babysat, and she'd done all this work to try to get in. And as soon as she turned up, I'm like, we got to go home. I'm just too drunk. And that was a big turning point for me. So yeah, in 2002, I gave up the alcohol, went straight cold turkey, didn't do AA or anything else, but just said, that's it, and yes, thankfully, a bit over 19 years later, I still haven't touched a drop, and it's the best decision I've ever done. So it cleared that addiction for me. I was still heavily, watching pornography behind my wife's back. And then of course computers come in, and, you're sneaking through, whenever you can, trying to clear your cache. All of a sudden your computer's full of virus. I don't know how that's happened again. Must open something wrong. All this hiding, shame, guilt that we just keep carrying through our lives. And so that's sort of that continued on for a period of time. My kids grew up with an angry, frustrated dad. I was caught in, which is, at the start when I talked about, the career empowerment and, is this all there is? That was me. We had a house in suburbia, our kids are going to nice schools. I would, spend an hour or so going to work all day, hour or so coming home, be on train or driving, get home, cook dinner, watch whatever rubbish was on television, go to bed, rinse and repeat, do the same thing over and over again. And do the same thing over and over again. And you're like, there's got to be more to life than this. And that was it. I was just stuck in this mundane routine, no inspiration, no joy, no happiness. And that just kept resulting in, and because I had no understanding of emotions, I had no understanding of storing of emotions and what took place. What would actually happen is about every 3 odd weeks, I would explode. You know, like whether it be over a simple thing about stacking, unstacking a dishwasher, or my daughter leaving clothes all over the place. Like I would just have this big eruption and people would disappear. You know, my wife would disappear off to the bedroom because she couldn't handle it, which is fine. My daughter would go here and I'd have arguments, you know, and you know, and this was just what kept happening. And again, I had no understanding. I had no one that would say, hey, that's not right, or no understanding about how these emotions worked, because I'd stored up all this trauma. I'd created this person who, you know, would, and then the way I saw it was, it's just like a kettle you fill up with water, right? You fill it up and then you put it on the stove, and eventually, you know, it just boils and it explodes, and then it whistles and it just keeps going. But once you've released the pressure and you turn the heat off, it all cools down again. And that was me. That was just going up and down through this yo-yo. So, you know, and that went on for, you know, my daughter is 25 now. So that was like 22 years that continued on this routine. We, you know, probably take a step back. I look back at my kids and I always said, I'm not going to be the father that my father was. When I look back, I was exactly the father my father was. Right? So we all wish to have something that we're not, but ultimately, unless we actually take time out to start to do some inner work and some deep self-development work, we don't end up, you know, doing anything about it. In 2000, I actually went and did a course. It was all about, when I look back now, a lot of the tools I now know and I'm reading about now and I'm slowly growing into now, I actually learned back in around about 99, 2000, which is all about consciousness, conscious behavior, subconsciousness, how we listen for trigger words and how we use those trigger words to come back, and how that's all based on our conditioning and everything else. But I knew it theoretically because that's where I was at that point in time, but I had no idea about how to embody it. I had no idea because my body wasn't ready for it. So that sort of took place. And then, so I'm going to sort of project forward. So, you know, my kids grew up in this angry household. My daughter became antagonist with me. So her and I would actually be arguing because she was very much like me. My son actually became quite demure, and he actually he sort of retracted. So whereas my daughter would explode and allow all her emotions out, then her and I would have these reactive fights. My son was the other way. He actually ended up being exactly like I was, actually hiding away from the emotions and not wanting to share them at all. Around about 2018. So, you know, so to put that in age aspect, I'm 51 at that point in time. Let me take a step back. About the age of 49, my dad and I hadn't hugged. Like we would catch up all the time, but we would never hug. There was always this barrier, energetic barrier between us where I just couldn't step into it. I decided to take up boxing because I love boxing, and I just started to take up boxing. And then I got to this point where my right elbow was so sore. Like I literally couldn't even use my right arm to throw a punch. And I went to doctor, physio, you know, acupuncturist. I ended up going to a chiropractor, and it was a holistic chiropractor. So it's about 20, so it must have been 2016. And I walked in, sat down with him, and he's looked at me, and I'm used to what chiropractors tend to do. And he's gone, right, so what's going on? I go, you know, sore elbow, I can't do this. He goes, easy, you got dad issues. I'm like, what? He's like, yep, you got dad issues. And then I just broke out, like just broke into tears in front of this guy. The first time I'd ever met him. He said, yeah, he said, I can tell you're all rolled over in your shoulders. You're carrying the weight of this relationship with your dad, about how oppressive he's been on you and how you feel you've never met his expectations and he hasn't done anything for you. And I'm like, oh, hang on, that's all a bit strange. So he's pretty much, I wrote a letter. And as the universe would work, as I know how the universe works, I was meant to be working the next weekend after writing the letter, and whatever was on got cancelled. So I rang up my dad and said, hey, I'm coming down to see you. Dropped in there and I said, I've got this letter I need you to read. Told him all here's everything I love, but here's everything that I've been carrying since the age of 12. Here are all the things that I use the word hate in the letter. Here's the things I've hated that you did through my life. And, my mum didn't like the word hate. I'm like, Mum, it's got nothing to do with you. It's between me and Dad. But, Dad read out the whole letter. And it was interesting because he had this sense of relief. He'd been carrying all these things for 40 years, or 37 years or what happens to be. And it's really interesting how two grown adult men can be so stubborn in their lives. Mm. And then, so he read the letter. We talked through a number of the items and we just cleared the air. And then ever since I saw him after that, he died 2 years after that. But up to that point in time, every time we saw him, we would embrace and hug and hold each other. Mm. And it was such a powerful thing to have done. And I just wish that I had known all this so much earlier, which is why I'm sort of now doing what I'm doing, because I don't want people to have that length of journey in their life with their relatives and their parents. So that then started me on this new path of, hang on a minute, that maybe there's something else out there about what's happening. So I cleared it with my dad, but I knew there was still something wrong. So I went away for a weekend, an Anzac Day weekend. It must have been about, around 2017. I just knew I had to leave. I said, my wife, I've got to go away for the weekend. I'm not telling you where I'm going, but every day I'll be back in phone range and I'll ring you to say I'm okay. And I did that. And I just went camping on my own. And funny enough, I got sick, which again was just the body's physical reaction to me letting some emotion out. But, came back from that, but I had no tools around that. My intuition told me what I had to do, but I had no tools in how to support that. So in 2017, I went and did that. 2018, then I knew something still wasn't wrong. I was in a high stress job, and I'm finding myself yelling at people who are sitting in a cubicle and not sitting in an office. And again, I'm like, this can't be right. Like, I'm in the middle of an office environment. Like, we're not blowing. There's nothing happening here. There's no wars going on around here. Like, I've got this, why am I so angry and frustrated still? So I went away to North Queensland for 4 days and stayed with a friend and, did some skydiving and hung out and with a view that might have solved some problems or some challenges, but it still didn't. I'm still angry. I'm still frustrated. We ended up selling up our house where we were because our son finished year 12. We sold everything, thought that's a good chance for us to do a big clean out, moved to a 2-bedroom apartment. And while we're there, my wife had seen this course that these people she'd been following on Instagram. It was in Brisbane. It was called, I think, the Bridge and Extreme. So 2 guys, Alexi Panos and Preston Smiles. Mm-hmm. So they ran this course, and she said, I want to do it. I'm like, cool, you fly up to Brisbane. So she did the first one, the Bridge. And then she actually then wanted to come back and do the second week. I'm like, we'll go back to Brisbane again. And in between that, I realized that Preston was running this thing called Unleash the Beast, which is a program that he ran up in Brisbane. Like, I just knew I had to go and do that. So we went to Brisbane 3 weekends in a row, actually flew up from Melbourne to Brisbane 3 weekends in a row. And then that weekend was just such a defining moment for me in my life. I went in there, I just had no idea what was going to take place. And, in confidentiality, I won't go through the exercises, but there's breath work and anger management and everything else, everything I needed. In this breathwork session, which was a 75-minute somatic breathwork session, I went through 3 phases in that breathwork. My first phase was I actually just wanted to die. Physically and emotionally and spiritually, I'm actually saying to myself, okay, heart, just shut down. Cool, turn off. Like, I know you're what's keeping me going. So if you shut down now, I'm all good. Like, I'm done. Like, close down. And I just wanted it to do that. My heart decided not to jump in on the party, which was a good thing. I then went into a grieving phase, and that grieving phase in that both my uncle, who'd passed away about 12 months before that, appeared to me and started to tell me it's okay. And then my grandfather, who'd passed away probably a dozen or 15 years before that, also appeared and was talking to me. Interesting, my father, who'd passed away 2 years before that, actually didn't appear. So I found that intriguing. But again, probably two of the other people in my life, my ancestors that I saw, appeared to me and said everything's going to be okay. And then the third phase, I just went through this process of what I call the demon of anger just left my body. Physically, anyone who's seen The Green Mile as a movie and sees a guy where all those sort of bugs and all the bad thing comes out, I visualized that took place. I just can remember hearing myself laying on the floor, just screaming, "Get the fuck out, get the fuck out, get the fuck out." And I just wanted this thing to leave, and it literally left. And then again, as the universe would have it, the song where they, after the breath work where they lay, to just relax and come back out. And I had a number of men that were supporting me, holding me through that process. The song that came off the back of that was What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong, which is my favorite song in the world. And so it just came on and I'm like, yes, this is a wonderful world. And ever since then, all that anger, all of the repressed emotion that I was holding basically just disappeared. And for once in my life, I sat back and I'm like, I've got space between my shoulder blades. And my heart just exploded open. And I was in a room with 50 other men, and all of a sudden, men who I had no trust for, who I had was shut off to, I was happily engaging with, embracing, telling them I loved them. It was just this most amazing weekend experience. I remember walking home and telling my wife, I've just walked home, but I did not touch the ground all the way home. I couldn't believe how light I felt. It's like I'd never literally put my feet on the ground. And so that was just this defining moment that I realized that as much as you can learn to hate and have all this anger and frustration and all that, you can have the opposite. And you can choose this as the life that you actually want and go through that process. So that was sort of, that's, if you like, my journey. Probably quickly to close out on the pornography thing that I spoke about earlier, when my wife did her first weekend, then I pretty much, when she came back and talked to what took place, I opened up to her and said, I've got a pornography addiction, but I will promise you from this weekend moving forward, I will never watch pornography again. Now, she was quite emotional about that because she hadn't realized how deep it was, and she felt, obviously betrayed and everything else. But off the back of that, yes. So from November 2019, I have not watched pornography ever again. So no alcohol addiction, no pornography. And again, I don't look at it anymore as having an addictive personality, because I used to have that label. I've got this addictive personality, everything else. All I now realize is that I no longer need the external vices to bring me happiness and joy. I know that that it's already within me and it's available for me.
Thanks, Stephen, for sharing all of that. I mean, there's so much in there, like just from your life, but as well, how certain things have been normalized in our society, and like both for men and women. But as you're sharing, there's so much, especially for men, that has been normalized in terms of being able to be able to just go with emotion and not feel, and to be all of the time in this competition space as well, and to not be able to follow whatever they want because we are supposed to do this and that and work and make money and have the house and everything that you're sharing. And there's so many things that have been normalized that aren't natural. That's one of the things that I usually say with everyone that I work with is there's a difference between what has been normalized and what's natural. And once we start to look into that, then we start always to unpack, as you were sharing, everything that wasn't processed, wasn't felt, wasn't integrated, and how all of that a lot of times comes from our conditioning, both consciously and unconsciously. I work a lot with the unconscious energetic ancestral patterns as well, so I definitely get what you are sharing on that. And I know from my own path, I've been really fortunate that I was introduced by my parents to a lot of this world of consciousness and spirituality from the time that I was a teenager. And when I was a teenager, I was able to learn about how to feel, about how to come back to the body. And through the years of doing a lot of my own work, seeing all of those things that I didn't know that I was carrying. And as you were saying, like I remember distinctively once that I moved to New York, and 1 week later, my mom, like we were Skyping, and she asked me how I was feeling, and I told her I feel like I just dropped a 50-kilo bag out of my back, and I didn't know that I was carrying that. And it's so interesting to know all of these different things that we're carrying, and that we don't have to, we're not meant to, and we are not supposed to carry that. And we're carrying that just because we haven't learned that that's not our place. And you know, I think that one of the things that you were sharing that I think is really interesting as well is being able to see addictions, whatever type of addiction, as a symptom of disconnection and trauma, instead of as a negative thing and shaming people because they have that, because of course that's not going to be helpful. I was talking the other day with one of my new clients about that. I was like, okay, let's change as well your relationship with your addictions, because your addictions are not the problem. Yes, they end up not being helpful, but they are not the problem. The problem is underneath it. And as you say, I think that it's so important to be able to have conversations about all of this, to open up, and as you're doing just now, being vulnerable with everything. Because when we are open, we invite others to be open. And I think that, you know, like with certain things, we need to break some of the cycles that we've been living, whether that is in our families, in our communities, in our societies, and to be able to do that with awareness and understanding that for some people there's a process, and that process might be long or short, it doesn't matter, but how to start to look at life differently, and how to be able to create space for what is necessary for us to heal and to look at things. Because as you were sharing, you know, like something that resonated was I'm also the middle kid in my family, although I'm actually the second of four, so I'm not even the one in the middle. And I remember I was doing this work a few years ago, as I was doing my training to work with family and systemic constellations, and something came up, and during one of the like inner sessions that I was doing for myself, and so I called my mom and I asked her if she knew anything that was similar to what I was experiencing now. And she said that I used to be so jealous of my brother, especially the older one, because he was so great at school. He was so great at sports, at art, at music, everything. And I always felt like when I was a kid, that I wasn't enough. I didn't remember that at all. For me, I grew up happy, loving my siblings, you know, like, and I had no recollection of that. Yet when I was doing this work, it came up, and it was so interesting to be able to talk, you know, like with my parents, that luckily they are still here, so that I actually have an understanding that happened, and not everything is there, because there's some stuff that I work on myself that comes from my grandparents and great grandparents, and like I have the tools to be able to work with, but not everyone. And I think that is so important from what you were sharing about, and what you're doing, that is creating the space for men to be able to share, and to be able to, through their sharing and through some understanding, to be able to open and to see a different path. Because it's not sometimes, it's simple, but simple doesn't mean easy a lot of times.
And you spot on. When you're saying that, it's interesting. I think it was might have been my dad's, one of his sort of milestone birthdays, and I sort of, family was all there, and I sort of asked my brother whether he wanted me to make a speech, and he sort of humiliated me in front of everybody else and sort of said, "I'm the older brother, I'll be the one making the speech. You can just sit down, thank you." And I'm like, so again, got a bit angry about this, and and a while later, we all went away with families, and and my brother still loves to drink, and at that stage I was drinking, so we'd had a few during the day, and then I think everyone had gone to bed, and I just said to him, I said, "Dude, what was all that about? Like, I feel I need to clean the air. Like, what happened?" And the first time he'd actually opened up, which is interesting when you talk about jealousy, because he said, "Dude, I'm jealous of you," and I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I was the oldest. I was meant to leave home first. I was meant to do travel first. I was meant to do this first. You left home first. You've traveled more than what I've traveled." And all of a sudden, he's actually looked at my life, and I'd never seen it from his angle, that he actually was jealous that I was actually out there doing these things that he hadn't done. So his way was then to try and keep me down by humiliating me or doing different things, because of that's just how we operated. And it was interesting for him to have opened up about that. And the one thing I really learned of now, and the one thing that I talk with people about, is it doesn't matter who you see, and it doesn't matter how tragic an event that something has taken place. Just ask this simple question: I wonder what happened to that person somewhere in their life that resulted that ended up them being like this. Because when they were the small baby in their mum's hands, they weren't like that. So what has taken place somewhere between birth and whatever they are, to end up, whether they're, where they've done tragic things of family violence or abuse, or they're on the street homeless or whatever else. When they were born, they weren't like that. So what's happened in their life? Like a simple inquiry question. And I find that's for me when I talk about heart-driven. If I come from that angle every single time for every person I meet, I wonder what's taken place in their life that resulted in them being like this, them having this judgment, them having this attitude, them being angry, frustrated, aggressive, or being full of love or full of emotion. Something has taken place, which is that, that conditioning or so forth. And so I find that that's just such a really simple technique for me to use. That helps me move away from that judgment, that when I see others, or that jealousy or everything else that might take place, it's like, okay, I just need to come from this I suppose that's just, in simple terms, coming from my heart, and just asking that very heart-driven question about, I wonder what took place with them. And as soon as you go into that inquiry mode, the world changes, and your mindset changes about how you see things and how you see other people. Like, someone abuses you in traffic, so I wonder what happened to them this morning that ended up resulting in them hopping in the car and being so angry, or in such a rush, or in such a thing. Like, what took place? Did they have a fight with our partner? Did they have a fight with their kids? Are they on the verge of losing their job? Like, did they just get bad news about a family member? Like, I wonder what actually took place, because that's just not, as you said, it's not normal behavior. It's not our true behavior to be angry and upset and frustrated and abusive. Like, as our truest nature is, as when we're born, is just to be open-hearted, loving people. Yeah. And actually have joy and happiness. I mean, whenever you see the first time that baby at the age of 2-3 months, when the dad or the mum or the grandma walks in and their eyes light up and they just laugh and giggle, like that is just the truest happiness and joy. That's just, that's where they come from. So what else has happened to take that away from our own truest nature that we've actually got?
Yeah, and I think, like, as you're sharing that's the thing that for many, our true nature is not there, because we have normalized so many things. We have normalized the anger, we have normalized the shouting, we have normalized the fighting and the separation and the judgment, instead of coming from a place, as you're saying, from the heart, or from a place of open curiosity, and developing a wider awareness that someone might be going through some deep shit at the moment, and they are behaving that way because they haven't learned how to behave differently, and something pushed their buttons and they are triggered. And I think that one of the key things, as you're saying, coming from that place of the heart, coming from a place of slowing down to be able to create a space for that inquiry, and to be able to put ourselves in an open space of non-judgment, as well as being able to have more open and honest communication. Because as you're sharing with your brother, it's so interesting. I see this all the time with my work. There's all of these different dynamics, whether that is like within two people or an entire family, and usually they are all comparing themselves to the others. They are all jealous they are all competing, because they never actually slowed down and actually had an honest conversation. As you're saying, you were trying to catch up to your brother, you're trying to compete and be better, and then you have that. So there's this comparison and this animosity somehow towards your brother, and then your brother is jealous that you were doing all of those things just because you were driven to do those things. And how easy it would be to at least not get to that level of comparison and anger and competition and animosity, that if we would have had the more conscious awareness growing up, if our parents, and hopefully then like us, then the next generation or the following generation, if we start to create more conscious awareness and more spaces for understanding our feelings, for having an honest and open communication, how we can actually create space for such a different life and prevent so much of the things that are unhelpful for our lives. Like as you were sharing, like what does it help for a family for one of the parents of the family to be in a job that they are not happy there, completely stressed out, coming home, taking it out on the kids, whether that is verbally, physically, or just by being not present.
Yes.
And that, then that gets passed to the kids, and then that's their experience. And we can prevent so much by actually being able to just burn ourselves open. And that is not normal. Like, it's so nice to see so many, in the last few years, so many circles, whether that is men's circles, like just circles in general, where people can actually go there and start to share and to be open, because that is what we need. And that is why the more conversations there are, the better it's going to be. Like there's nothing that we lose by creating space and by slowing down. And even, I was chatting yesterday at one of my classes, and someone said, you just spent, she was talking for 2 minutes only, and she was like, you didn't cut me at any point, like you were actually listening. And I was like, yes, like you were sharing, and I'm listening. What I thought in the moment is like, she must not have that in her life. Like she must always have someone like interjecting and cutting her from what she wants to share. Therefore, this is new for her, the fact that someone actually was present and listened to her. And this is the same all of the time with everyone. Like we all have our own like baggage. So being able to create that space is so great that you're doing that through the work that you're doing.
Yeah, look, the thing that I see globally at the moment is all the systems that sit around us globally are focused on repression and suppression. So to your words around normalizing, the systems around how do we normalize repression and suppression? So how do we get people not being able to talk up about freedom of speech? How do we repress things down? And then when people want to actually share their emotions, how do we actually suppress that? And the more that we can have a repressed and suppressed society, we're in control. And the controlling mechanisms can sit around that. And that's not normal behavior. You know, if you go back thousands and thousands of years, the reason why many civilizations succeeded is because they created open spaces where elders or even chiefs or wisdom holders or medicine men and women or shamans could actually be openly challenged on their belief system. And there was open debate forums and there was open discussions about whether things were right and wrong. And no one ever felt that they were then put down by it. It just become an open dialect and an open debate. In Australia, you know, if you look back in the Aboriginal culture here in Australia, interestingly, you know, there's no castles. And I loved it. I was reading this recently, like, you know, they could have built all these castles. They could have built all these moats and everything else. The way it used to work is that within elders, within tribes, and even there's 500 separate tribes used to exist, even across tribes, they would sit down and there was no such thing as majority. It was everybody agreed or we continued the conversation. And they opened and they continued the dialogue until they all agreed on the path to move forward. That is such an open, conscious space, because it was like, okay, if someone still disagreed, okay, what is it within you that is, what is there something we've missed? Is it something you're just fearing? Is there something you have more to the table? Let's continue to have this conversation until everyone had that chance to get it all out on the table. And then once everything was on the table, then decisions could be made about how everybody moved forward. And we just don't have that opportunity now. I mean, and I think we've even seen this more so, and we're definitely not going to get into the last 2 years, but, you know, we've seen that more so about this, how much further are we trying to normalize suppression and repression? And so it's about how do we get back to this different space of, as you said, allowing it. You know, one of the things that I do within my program is one of the lessons that I actually get people to go out and say, go and find somebody. And for 15 minutes, you know, I know you used to talk about this girl for a couple of minutes, right? For 15 minutes, do nothing but sit, listen, and ask questions. Do not inject yourself into the conversation and do not put your opinion, your thoughts. Continually just inquire and inquire and inquire. And it's amazing what comes out of the back of that 15 minutes, particularly when they're the ones that are heard. It's probably the first time in their life that they can remember where for 15 minutes someone else has actually sat with them and just listened. And the power of just that, the power of learning to listen is huge. You know, just us being able to sit there and you know, what I've loved about this conversation, there's been acknowledgement, but there's been no interjection by either of us. And I hope the listeners pick up on this, the fact that, you know, we've both been able to just allow us to have our own, you know, conversation. But that's the beautiful thing about it. You know, we listen, we understand, and then we both inquire as to where we're at with each other. And that's so powerful.
Yeah. And you know, Stephen, I think that it's also one of the things of why I love podcasts and why I love to have conversations with people from different places, different backgrounds, different lifestyle than me as well. Because that's real, that's happening. And as well, to be able to actually model what this could look like. If we don't have anyone modeling how an open conversation can happen, how being present and listening happens, as you're saying, like 15 minutes, like if we have never been shown that, then we don't know that as a possibility. And this is why the more that this type of work, the more that this type of conversations happen, the more that those circles happen, the easier it is for all of us to take that home, to take that to our workplace, to take that everywhere. Because at the end of the day, and this is one of the things that I love about society, is that society runs by people.
Mm-hmm.
Like behind every business, behind every organization, behind every government, like, yes, they might be like self-perpetuating systems and corporations and whatever, but there's people there. Mm-hmm. And that is, for me, one of the things that I will say, like, if people make those connections, then things will change. So yes. Like, that's always an interesting thing. And I'm so like into this conversation that I just realized that we are getting like into the time to bring it to an end. But I would love to have another conversation with you, Stephen. But before we do that, I usually ask towards the end of our podcast a question that I think, like, it might be something that you already perhaps shared, but what is the one thing that you wish that everybody knew?
Wow, that's an absolutely fantastic question. The one thing that I wish that everybody knew is that they can choose to be happy today. Simple as that. You can choose to attach yourself to your story and attach yourself to how you got to this point in time, but that is all in the past. And so every single person listening to this right this point in time, from now on, can go, you know what? I'm actually going to choose to be happy from this point on and find happiness in everything that I do moving forward. And every event that takes place, as much as you feel it might be a sad or a tragic event, you can always find a piece of joy. Even if that's the passing of a loved one, find joy in the life and the beauty they had when they were alive. Find joy in the fact that they have now joined the ancestors who can now bring you wisdom through your spiritual connection with them. They've never left. They've just left a physical body, but their soul, their energy still exists and is there for you forever moving forward. So in any event, you can find joy and happiness. That's what I just wish that everybody could just understand and tap into that. And if everybody immediately today could go, I'm just going to find joy and happiness in everything I do, our world would change overnight, globally. Everything that would happen, how our forests work, how our trees work, how our birds work, how our animals work, how we connect in with all those beautiful living creatures, rocks, landscapes, everything changes as soon as everyone goes, I choose to be happy from this point moving forward. Choosing not to be happy is choosing to attach yourself to your ego and choosing to remain in a state of unhappiness. If you choose that, then why not choose the other? I think that's would be the parting message for me.
Beautiful. Thank you for that message, Stephen. And thank you for taking the time, for sharing, for being open, for listening, and for everybody that wants to connect with you, wants to check a little bit more about what you do. Where can they find you?
Yeah, so Stephen Milverton. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I go under my name. So it's easy to find, and my website's just stephenmilverton.com, and you can jump over there and see what I'm doing in that space. So I just want to say, Brian, thank you. Your ability to just be open, to listen, to create a space for me to have this conversation has been fantastic. I've just really enjoyed it, and I'm extremely grateful for yourself in doing this podcast, in creating this space and allowing people to be able to listen in, to all the different guests that you've actually got. It takes a lot of courage for people to start a podcast because they are being vulnerable and putting themselves out there. And so the fact you've done that is just an amazing gift. So yeah, I thank you, and thank you for accepting me as being a guest. I'm greatly appreciative.
Thank you, Stephen. And as you were saying, we'll have all of those links on the comments, on the notes, on the show notes, so that everybody can see that. If you're listening to this and something resonated with you, leave us a comment, whatever it is that you're listening to this. Go and check out the work that Stephen is doing, and create space, as we've been sharing. Create space for conversations, for looking into your life, for seeing all of those patterns of behavior, and check out whatever you are, if there's any circles that are happening, men's circle or mixed circle, that are going to be places for you just to connect. So thank you, Stephen, once more, and thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.